This Parsha Podcast is dedicated in the merit of a refuah sheleimah, of a speedy and complete and total recovery for Benyamin, Yaakov, ben Devorah, Yosefa. This is the father of our dear friend Ethan Weiss. They found a staph infection in his chest, and he is in need of a healing. So please include him in your prayers. Benyamin, Yaakov, ben Devorah, Yosefa may have a complete and total and speedy recovery. I want to begin by speaking a little bit about some current events as they relate to Israel. Maybe a touch controversial. If it's not for you, just fast forward. I know a lot of y'all have strong feelings about the renewed president. And as you all know, I know nothing about politics. I had a comprehensive rabbinic education, and none of it was about politics. And the only thing I was taught about in rabbi school vis-a-vis politics is that just don't go there. You're the rabbi. You focus on the rabbinics and the Torah and the teaching and the inspiration. Don't get involved. Those waters are shark infested. Don't enter the shark infested waters. Don't row into them. Don't wade into them. And if you have a dilemma, a question, how to enter the shark-infested waters, and you're considering the two options, to row versus wade, don't do it. That's the only thing I was taught in rabbi school vis-a-vis politics. That said, something really remarkable happened just today. I'll give you some background for me. Last week, so this previous Thursday, I was working on a new podcast that I had titled A Biblical Solution to the Arab-Israeli Conflict. And I wanted to suggest something radical, a radical solution to this problem. This problem has been around since all of us have been alive, and whatever has been tried has failed, and our people in the Holy Land suffered so much, and especially so in recent years, as we all know. And everyone seems to be coming back with the same plan, just a minor tweak and a minor tweak. And I had a plan. And the plan I wanted to outline was a biblical plan. It was biblical and not strictly legal under international law. This was my plan. The Torah tells us that there was a man named Ishmael, son of Abraham. And the first thing we're told about him, the angel testifies, prophesies, ahead of time, before this baby is even born, this man will be wild, a wild man. V'huya para adam. And indeed, he's wild. And he's so wild that he poses a mortal threat to his half-brother Isaac. And he tries to kill him. And Sarah, mother of Isaac, tells Abraham, chapter 21 of Genesis, banish Ishmael, banish his mother. And Abraham didn't want to do it. Abraham had an open home. He welcomed in everyone, idolaters and criminals, terrible people. He's going to banish his own son? He didn't want to do it. And then God tells Abraham, hearken to Sarah. And indeed, Ishmael and his mother, Hagar, are banished to Egypt. Now, we have a principle that the deeds of the forefathers, they're supposed to be harbingers, they're portents, they're instructive for their children. And when we see, thousands of years later, the descendants of Ishmael, again trying to kill the descendants of Isaac, and every day, every single day, literally every day, there are attacks, and some of them, thank God, are thwarted, knife stabbings, guns, car rammings, bombs, and most of them we don't even hear about. Every single day, Ishmael's running amok. And all the solutions to the problem we're just repeating different versions of the same solution. So one solution is, let's just build a wall around these people. And that worked a little bit, but walls are sometimes porous. Let's have a diplomatic solution, the peace process, the Oslo Accords. Let's empower them, make the PA legitimate, give them weapons. Let's disengage from Gaza unilaterally, and we'll just cut our losses and just leave and pull out 9,000 Jews who had establish themselves and their families and their jobs there. Let's give economic opportunities to our enemies. And nothing works. And I wanted to make a podcast to propose a biblical solution. We have an example of this exact problem in the Torah. And the solution was to send Ishmael away. And that was a little bit too chicken to just title the podcast A Biblical Solution to the Arab-Israeli Conflict. So I actually had a conversation with one of my study partners. I said, I think we're going to admit I'm too chicken. So I switched it to a open parentheses, controversial, close parentheses, biblical solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. And I was going to explain that if this is a solution that you feel uncomfortable with, if you're queasy about this, well, you're in good company. Because Abraham himself, he resisted. He didn't want to do it. And then some will say, well, you can send away the innocents. It's not their fault. They're not terrorists. Well, Hagar was innocent. She was no threat to anyone, and she was also sent away. So there is a precedent, again, in the biblical solution to this problem of just sending them all away until their behavior is no longer a threat. Ishmael's intolerable. He must be banished. And even if there's some collateral damage and there's damage to the innocents, they don't deserve to be banished. They're not a threat. They're sent away as well. And I think the insight is that it's actually beneficial for Ishmael. Because what happened, what's the epilogue to the story? After he spent time in Egypt, he came back. And he was no longer a threat to Isaac. He accepted Isaac. And he was welcomed back into Abraham's good graces. So to me, this was the idea for the podcast that was radical at the time when I had thought about it. It was a controversial biblical solution at the time. Find the standards. What are the Torah's standards for Ishmaelites living in the land? They have to accept the sovereignty of Isaac. They have to not pose a threat to Isaac. And they should not try to dislodge Isaac from the land. And they could be there. Now, of course, it's controversial because forced resettlement, it's not really in vogue and it's not strictly legal. It's actually beyond the pale of the conventional wisdom. And of course, I don't know if y'all have been following the news. Today, this is Tuesday. We're recording this on Tuesday. Today, Prime Minister Netanyahu is in Washington. And this exact idea is proposed by none other than the President of the United States of America. And it's an unbelievable moment where the most powerful man of the world says, let's follow the biblical solution to this problem. I'm too chicken to make a podcast about it without all sorts of disclaimers. And he just says it in front of the whole world. Clean out Gaza, the 2 million Gazans, move them away. And the things that he's saying are just things that you're not used to hearing in the international stage, certainly not from someone with so much power. The Palestinian Authority cannot rule Gaza. They don't have the ability to do it. We have to take these people and move them away to a different place. And again, without equivocation, there's no room for a nuclear Iran. And Gaza must be cleaned out, and the Americans are accepting responsibility. We'll clean it out. Oh, and there will be a peace solution in the broader Middle East with Saudi, even without a Palestinian state. And I follow one of the Israeli journalists, and what he's saying, he says, there's never been an American president in history saying such things. And then he added, listen to this line from an Israeli journalist, if this person was Israeli, they would be arrested for inciting violence, inciting solutions. There will be investigation already in place. This is more radical than the most radical Israeli. Now, I know a lot of y'all have strong feelings about the new president, but Prime Minister Netanyahu today said there's never been a better friend in the White House than President Trump. And it's very, very hard to argue that point on the merits. And you think about just the developments of the last couple of weeks, the hostage exchange. You think about these poor people are in tunnels in Gaza for hundreds and hundreds of days, away from the families, between life and death. And, people are torn. Is it a good deal? Is it a bad deal? Obviously, everyone's very joyous for a brother or a sister that we get back. But people bristle at the fact that we have to give up so many bloodthirsty murderers who have so much Jewish blood on their hands. And it's unconscionable to release such terrorists back to the streets. And of course, it incentivizes future hostage taking. It's very hard to argue today that the Gilad Shalit deal in 2012, I think it was, where they exchanged 1,027 terrorists, legitimate terrorists, for one Jewish soldier. And by the way, those terrorists already had a body count of more than 500 victims. And one of them was the accursed Yehia Sinwar, the mastermind of October 7th. It's very hard to argue that was a good deal. But nevertheless, there's progress. And we've gotten back, a dozen or so of our brothers and sisters. And I saw an argument that changed my perspective on this deal. I saw an argument that argued that, one of the hostages had said, there aren't 15,000 Hamas members in Gaza. The whole place is Hamas. The whole place. We get this picture in the Western world that, there's 15,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 terrorists, and everyone else is just under their thumb. No. The rank and file, the street supports Hamas. The reason why there's no elections in the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank is because Hamas would win. And we know that, the Israelis eliminated, 15, 20,000 Hamas fighters, and they replenished them. No problem. So it's not really the numbers of individual terrorists. There's maybe millions of them. The success of the war will be about eliminating this ideology and the means of terror. So yes, give back these people. So what? We need to get our brothers and sisters back home. But that's only one development that I think is worthy of celebration. It's very significant. I know this is my take. My take is that a lot of people think of Trump as the pompous, the flamboyant, maybe a little buffoonish real estate guy. He's the president of the United States. And the first international leader he invites to Washington is the Jewish one. It's an unbelievable thing. We have to appreciate that. And he's saying, UNRWA, we're not supporting UNRWA anymore. These are things that a lot of people will be scared to do. And all the munitions that were held up and the bunker buster bombs and all the different armaments that the previous administration had held up, he releases it. And he makes a task force to fight anti-Semitism on campus. And the Hamas supporters were deporting them. Iran, maximum pressure campaign. Definitively no nukes. And talking about the annexation of Judea and Samaria, expanding Israel. We've never had anything like this, and I think it's something to celebrate. And of course, disclaimers, it's all in the hands of the Almighty. We don't know how much of these plans will be implemented. Don't trust politicians. Yes. And I'm not commenting at all on any domestic discussions. But today, what I was too chicken to suggest, without all sorts of disclaimers, the United States president said it out loud in front of the entire world. Resettle Gaza, take Ishmael, send him away, clean out this hornet's nest of terror. And I know I don't talk about politics. I don't profess to be an expert, and my training did not involve these matters. And I understand many of y'all may have voted for the other candidate and may have legitimate concerns about the incoming administration. But to hear an American president advocating for a biblical solution that's radical to a serious problem, a solution that matches the Torah's prescription, it's very noteworthy. And we hope, all of us hope, regardless of political preferences, we hope that peace will come finally to the Holy Land and to the world, and hopefully very soon. And I will say, our nation, we have a very long memory, and we appreciate when world leaders do something on our behalf. I had the privilege of reading the opening sentences of the book of Ezra. It's in our scriptures, our Tanakh, and it lauds, who does it laud? Cyrus, king of Persia. Why? Cyrus the Great. Why? Because he's taking steps to tell the Jews, go back to your homeland. Overcome your enemies. We have to appreciate what's happening over here. With all the nonsense and all the drama and all the news that's happening, the most powerful person in the world, I didn't believe that he would do these things going back, 10 years, 8 years ago. Recognizes the Golan Heights, recognizes Jerusalem, spearheads the first peace deal in the Middle East in 30 somewhat years. We're grateful. We're grateful for him for supporting Israel in these very significant ways. We appreciate all presidents and foreign leaders who stick their neck out for the Jews. Listen, I said at the time, Biden came to Israel after October 7th, and he moved American assets to the region, and he said his famous don't. That will forever redound to his merit. Nitzan. Everyone hates Nitzan. I don't hate Nitzan. I love Nitzan. Do you know why? Because when the Jews needed help, he told his administration, anything that can fly, anything, we're going to send it to our allies in Israel. And the Arabs deployed the oil weapon, and America suffered. They suffered to help the Jews. God said, I will bless those who bless you. His Jewish, of course, Secretary of State Kissinger, he says, let the Israelis bleed a little bit more. And Nitzan said, no, anything that can fly goes there. I'll tell you today, in my opinion, the reason why this country has more energy than any other country in the world is because the Americans said, we're going to risk energy to save the Jews, to help the Jews. God says, I'm going to give you more energy than anyone else, more than the Saudis and the Russians and the Venezuelans, more than anyone else. And Trump deserves his credit as well. And we hope and pray that we will witness a day where there will be peace in the world and, of course, in the land. May it come speedily in our days. Oh, one more thing. I did see, apparently in 2018, the current Secretary of Defense, the recently confirmed Secretary of Defense, he was interviewed, and somehow the subject of rebuilding the temple came up. It's like, well, why not? Like, what are we waiting for? Sometimes we have to hear it from people who are, from other religions and other nations saying things that we should really be saying. Why not? Why not? Why not now? We've been waiting and praying for it for so long, and who knows, maybe good times are around the corner. And of course, it's all in the hands of Hashem. We know that. But still, we celebrate when there are significant movements done by others in our favor. It's a little bit more political than I used to talking about. So send your feedback, good and bad, any love mail or hate mail, rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. It's Parshas Beshalach. This is still the Parsha Podcast. You recall the Jewish nation. They leave Egypt and they're enveloped by a divine protective cloud. By day, a pillar of fire at night. They take a circuitous route to not go back to Egypt. Moshe takes the bones of Joseph to inter in the land, fulfilling the promise made to Joseph many years prior. Pharaoh is goaded to pursue the Jews, and together with a formidable army, he encircles them. Bats up against the sea. The waters split. They split into 12 walkable paths. And the most dramatic event up to that point, perhaps in history, the nation enters the sea on dry land. There's walls of water on either side, and they are walking. The Egyptians make a poor decision to pursue them. And when they enter, the waters crash down upon them, and they drown. And the righteous among them, the relatively righteous, drown quickly like lead. The wicked Egyptians drown slowly, And after the miracle, the nation erupts in spontaneous song, the song at the sea, thanking the Almighty for this tremendous miracle. And they stockpile and collect all the booty that was fastened to the Egyptian chariots. And the booty and the plunder at the sea exceeded the booty and the plunder at the Exodus. Right after this tremendous miracle, they travel for 3 days without water. They arrive in the city of Marah, and there is water there, but the waters are bitter, and they become sweetened when Moshe throws a stick into them. And in Marah, the nation is commanded with several mitzvahs, the first installment really of mitzvahs that the nation received after the Exodus. Of course, they're going to get the mitzvahs in mass just a little bit away at Sinai. The parsha continues with what happened with the food supply. The nation took out some matzah that they took it out as dough. They baked it in sukkos, but now the matzah has been depleted, and a miraculous food supply that will continue for 40 years. It begins, gift-wrapped manna raining down from heaven each morning, with the exception of Shabbos. The parsha ends when the nation is stranded a second time without water. This time there's a different solution. Moshe is told to strike a rock. He does that. It emits water. Of course, that's not to be confused with a similar event that happens in the book of Numbers. And the parsha concludes with the first war against an enemy, Amalek, the nation of Esav attacks our people. And Joshua, together with a contingency of men, they decimate the Egyptians. They're in the valley, fighting down below, while Moshe up on high raises his hands in prayer. In this Parsha Podcast, I want to share 2 ideas and 1 dilemma, 2 awesome ideas, 2 fun ideas, followed by maybe a surprising and stimulating dilemma for this week's Parsha Podcast. The Exodus was supposed to be a 3-day excursion, a 3-day festival. Maybe 3 days there and 3 days back. But that was the plan. And this has been referenced multiple times in the story. When God initially at the burning bush tells Moshe, go down to Egypt, tell Pharaoh a message. We want to leave temporarily. We want to have just this little hiatus. We're going to go for 3 days into the wilderness, and we'll have a festival, and we'll offer sacrifices to God, and we will come back. That's the plan in Exodus chapter 3. When Moshe actually conveys the first message to Pharaoh, the one that flopped, right? Pharaoh didn't release the people. He exacerbated their circumstances. Again, chapter 5, verse 3, Moshe says to Pharaoh, the God of the Hebrews, he wants us to go on a 3-day excursion into the wilderness and to go offer sacrifices. And the plan is to come back. And this plan is reiterated between the 4th and the 5th plagues. This is in Exodus chapter 8, verse 23. Moshe tells Pharaoh, we want to go for 3 days, and we'll come back. This is referenced in our Parsha as well. 7 days after the Exodus, Pharaoh has encircled the fleeing Israelites. Why 7 days? So Rashi tells us the Pharaoh was told the nation is escaping. Well, he knew that, right? 14:5. V'yudad l'melech Mitzrayim. Pharaoh was told that the nation is escaping. Didn't he know that already ahead of time? No. Pharaoh had some scouts that he sent with the Israelites, with the nation. And after 3 days, well, the plan is, okay, you're done now. You're 3 days out. Do your festive excursion. Have this oasis, this festival in the wilderness, and come back. But the nation is marching forward. So they rush back to Pharaoh. It was a ruse. It was a deception. They're fleeing. They're not coming back. So the 4th day, they come to Pharaoh, tell him that news. He mobilizes his army. And then on the 5th and the 6th day, he chases. And at the eve of the seventh day, that's when he surrounds them. And that's why on the seventh day of Passover, of Pesach, we have the second festival, which marks really the second Exodus. The first Exodus was in Egypt when they left, day one. And the second Exodus, well, that's the events of our Parsha. When Pharaoh had them, they were trapped. And a miracle happened. A miracle that our sages tell us really was a revisiting of the 10 plagues and the 10 miracles. And that was the finality to the Exodus. Exodus 2.0, when the nation was forever released from Pharaoh's clutches. But let's focus on this would-be 3-day excursion. The initial request was for 3 days. What would have happened had Pharaoh said, you know what, that's a reasonable request. Take a 3-day break, hiatus, a little lapse in your servitude. Go do what you need to do. Come back. I accept. One of the favorite Parsha Podcast questions is those counterfactuals. What would have happened had Pharaoh said yes? Well, this is revisited multiple times. In 3 different verses, we're told this is a 3-day request. Why is Moshe telling Pharaoh it's a 3-day request? And in reality, they just leave and don't come back. So I saw the Midrash. The Midrash says, well, this was always a ruse. The plan was never to come back. The plan was always to just 3 days and then just keep on marching, never to return. But this was a ruse in order to get Pharaoh to chase them, because the nation really needed 2 exoduses. It had to be that they left Egypt and they had the Exodus and then Pharaoh had to chase them. And therefore, they told him ahead of time, it's only 3 days, so that he will actually pursue them, chase them down to have the second showdown. That's what the Midrash says. But I want to talk about 2 different approaches to this question. One of them is very astonishing. It's a very famous piece. And to me, it's a very powerful set of ideas. We, of course, recall that the plan that God told Abraham about, it was a 400-year enslavement in a foreign land. We did the math in last week's Parsha Podcast. I'm sure y'all remember. Some may have some trauma from all that math. They didn't actually spend 400 years in Egypt. They spent only 210 years in Egypt. So what happened to those 190 years that remained? So Rashi tells us, well, the count actually starts from the birth of Isaac. This piece, it's cited by the great Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, who is a relative of ours, a very famous rabbinic figure in America in the 20th century. And actually, my name, Yaakov, I'm named after him. So there's a special affinity that we have here on the Parsha Podcast for Rabbi Kamenetsky. He says something very interesting, very surprising. The nation was supposed to be in Egypt for 400 years. That was the plan. That's what God told Abraham. But they had reached a point where staying in Egypt was no longer feasible. They had reached a point where they were so thoroughly depressed, so thoroughly degraded as a people. There's no way that they would endure another 190 years of this sort of enslavement. They needed like a spiritual boost to recharge their batteries in order to get through the next 190 years. The 3-day plan was not a ruse. They were at the depths of a spiritual decay. And what they needed was a 3-day excursion, a 3-day festival that would invigorate them with the energy needed to withstand another 190 years of suffering. That was the plan. And that's what would have happened had Pharaoh said yes. If Pharaoh just said yes, they would have left for 3 days and come back and finish their term. Finish the 400 years. But of course, Pharaoh chose to rebuff this request. He was unreasonable. He was unwilling to give the nation up even for 3 days. And as a result, the plan changed. The Exodus was going to be permanent. Now, what to do with the prophecy? The prophecy told us that there's going to be 400 years in Egypt. So I think the most interesting part of this idea is that the prophecy was retrofitted to a different timeline. We'll start the clock retroactively. We'll begin it from the birth of Isaac. Now, to me, there's two magnificent ideas here in this piece. I think it's a shocking point. God tells Moshe, go tell Pharaoh, it's a 3-day plan. It's a 3-day festival. And that was legitimate. And it would have served as a pause of servitude and provide a surge of relief for the people, physical relief, spiritual relief. And that would have enabled the people to go back into the grind for another 190 more years in Egypt. It would have been like this amazing vacation. And it makes you wonder, what would they have done for those 3 days? It's a 72-hour respite amidst a 400-year enslavement. What could be so invigorating and transformative that would empower the nation to get through another 190 years of servitude? That's, I think, point number one. The second idea that I really like, I think it's a powerful insight. Prophecies are fixed and fungible at the same time. The 400 years is fixed. There's no way to change that. But there would have been one version of 400 years, which would be 400 years in Egypt proper. Because of decisions made by Pharaoh and others, that same 400 years is still fixed, but it's also malleable. We're going to start the clock with the birth of Isaac. Now, I thought of a few precedents for this idea. So you recall perhaps in Exodus chapter 1, Pharaoh has a plan. Take all the male babies, not even Jewish, all the male babies in Egypt, toss them into the water. A terrible decree of infanticide. Why did Pharaoh want to throw all the males into the water? Well, he had a prophecy, Rashi tells us. And the prophecy told him the Savior of Israel will have his downfall in the water. But we don't know exactly, is the Savior of Israel, is he Israel born? Is he Hebrew born? Or maybe he's Egyptian born? So Pharaoh's solution to that, or the way he implemented that prophecy, is to take all the babies, regardless of their parentage and pedigree, take them all, toss them into the water, and therefore you'll just solve your problem. Nip it in the bud. Now, was this an accurate prophecy or an inaccurate prophecy? It was accurate. The downfall of the Savior of Israel indeed was the result of the water. Not the water that Pharaoh had envisioned, but the May Meriv, the waters of the strife, when Moshe strikes the stone instead of speaking to it, and that condemned Moshe to not enter the land. The prophecy was true. The actual implementation of the prophecy, that's what Pharaoh got wrong. Now, there's a similar example to this. When Pharaoh has the dialogue with Moshe and Aaron, he says, don't go. Why do you insist on going? See, you should witness, ra'ah, that this force of evil is opposite you. It's a bad idea to go and leave Egypt. And Rashi says that this is a form of a prophecy. Pharaoh had this prophetic, clairvoyant vision that there's this force called evil. It's a force of blood and bloodshed. And that is what you will encounter once you leave Egypt. It's smarter for you. It's safe for you to stay here. Now, they left and they survived, right? Our sages tell us that in the wilderness, there was a national circumcision. And circumcision involves some blood, I've been told. I've never witnessed one myself. When I had the great privilege of serving as a sandik for my own son's bris, I was like this, turning away. Don't really enjoy the sight of blood. I have some kids that want to watch everything just to see the splurting blood. And others are like me. Everyone's different, right? There was a fulfillment of this prophecy. There was blood in the wilderness. It just wasn't the blood that Pharaoh had interpreted the prophecy to be, it was a different blood, a good blood, a productive blood, the blood of the circumcision. And in the aftermath of the golden calf, God says, I want to destroy this nation. And Moshe says, what will Egypt say? They'll say, oh, look, we were right. There was blood. There was destruction. And that argument is what Moshe uses to forestall the destruction of the nation after the golden calf. We have a 400-year prophecy. And that doesn't prevent free will from making an impact. Thanks to the choices of Pharaoh, the servitude was shortened, and still the prophecy was true. It was just altered. The manifestation of it was altered. In our Torah 101 podcast series, we learned about Messiah, and this idea was featured, that there's different types of Messiah. Messiah is a fixed reality. It will definitely happen. The prophecies will definitely come true. But we still have latitude to determine how those prophecies are manifested. 400 years will happen. It would have happened had Pharaoh allowed a 3-day respite. He chose otherwise. It still happened, just in a different way. The prophecy was true, and the free will still existed. I want to suggest perhaps a different idea for how to understand this would-be 3-day journey, or this proposed 3-day journey. I want to say that maybe it was a ruse, but it wasn't a ruse per se for Pharaoh and the Egyptians. It was for the Israelites themselves, for the Jews themselves. There was a very difficult decision the nation had to make. Not everyone we know was brave enough to make this decision, was courageous enough to go ahead with this. 80% of our brethren were left behind. They were so bound up to Egypt, they couldn't release themselves from the shackles of Egypt. They remained behind. The nation was told, this people, this land, this culture, this ideology, this way of living, that is everything that you've known since you were born and since your parents were born. You've been here for hundreds of years. You must be separated as a distinct nation, a nation from amidst another nation. That's a hard thing to do. To alter your identity and say, no, I'm not an Egyptian. I'm a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have a distinct identity. I have a distinct mission in life, a destiny unlike any other people. That's very difficult. To change not just what you do, but who you are and what you stand for, your essence, that's the hardest thing to change. And a whole people were told, this is what you need to do. Moshe shows us a genius tactic for how to do something very big. It's very hard to get someone to do something very big all at once. Everyone knows, how do you eat an elephant? It's not one bite, not one gulp, one bite at a time. Now, of course, elephants, not kosher. You don't eat an elephant. But proverbially, the concept. You have to take enormous projects and do a small bit at a time. How do you undo hundreds of years of built-up affiliation and affinity to Egypt? You don't say, let's leave all at once. A quantum leap for mankind. What about a 3-day vacation? Can we pull that off? Are you willing to go on a 3-day cruise, a 3-day excursion into the wilderness? We'll just have some celebration. We'll have a little festival, offer sacrifices. We'll come back. Don't worry about it. That's maybe a bit more doable. And once you have a little bit of progress, a tiny little chink in the armor, a tiny little chisel into a thick 100-foot wide wall of reinforced concrete, you've made some progress. And once you start, you could progress. You think about people who never had the privilege of observing Shabbos. I always tell people, I was never tempted with violence Shabbos. Zero temptation. That's where I grew up. I'm indoctrinated since I was a kid. Only ate kosher. And every time I pass the Whataburger here, it smells really great. I can see why people are so obsessed with it. But I have zero temptation. It's not within the wheelhouse, the realm of feasible activity for me. You start keeping Shabbos? You start observing kosher? That's leaving Egypt. To do that all at once? Well, Moshe would say, well, what about 3 days? Do we try for 3 days? Could you wear your tefillin and pray to Hashem for 3 days? Could you try doing something for a little bit at a time? Could you keep Shabbos for 1 hour? Is that possible? A little nibble here, a little nibble there. That's how you leave Egypt. There's a lesson here in the anatomy of change. You don't leave Egypt all at once. You leave for 3 days, and once you're out for 3 days, well, you've done this far. Could we try another day? Could we try another 3 days? And before you know it, you have radical, complete, total transformation. I think this is a powerful insight. It's a well-known concept, but sometimes we either take small goals or take enormous bites at large goals. And the sweet spot is to take an enormous goal and small little bites. Small little bites, 3 days over here, 3 days over there, and before you know it, you're in the land flowing with milk and honey. That's the first idea I wanted to share from the Parsha. The second idea, very clever, a little bit different, very Hasidic, one that I really enjoy. I don't know if it's quite as radical as the idea that we shared at the beginning, the geopolitical idea that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast. This was very new to me. I found this in my grandfather's writings. And I looked it up, and it's a mind-blowing insight. After the splitting of the sea, we have the song at the sea. But we first have a description of the state of the people before they began to sing. The verse tells us, this is 14:31, and Israel saw the great hand that God did to Egypt, and they feared, the nation feared God, Vaya'aminu b'Hashem, and they believed in Hashem, uveMoshe avdo, and in Moshe, his servant. So there's a belief here. There's a transformation of belief. They had maybe some degree of belief prior, but now they have belief in God and belief in Moshe, his servant. So the great Rabbi Tzadok, one of the giants of the Hasidic movement, he has a very clever way to interpret this verse. They believed in God and they believed in Moshe, Moshe's servant. He shares first a principle. Every one of those 600,000 Jews has a little overlap with Moshe. There's a little bit of Moshe within every one of those individuals. And the way he explains this is, well, Moshe, we're told, Moshe is like an amalgam of 600,000 of his brethren. And there's many sources to this effect. Moshe equals the whole nation, which means that Moshe, within himself, he incorporated the qualities and the strengths and the attributes and the soul of the entirety of the nation. So Moshe equals 600,000. Well, what does that mean for every one of those individuals? Every one of those 600,000 souls has 1/600,000th of Moshe. So Moshe is like a microcosm of the whole nation. And the nation, well, that's a macrocosm of Moshe. They're just two of the same thing on different scales. And then he demonstrates how the state of the nation always mirrored the state of Moshe. And the state of Moshe always mirrored the state of the nation. He gives a whole bunch of examples of that. For example, he says, the nation does the golden calf. What does Moshe do? Again, this maybe is its own subject of inquiry. What does Moshe do when the nation does the golden calf? He takes the tablets and he shatters them to smithereens. It's like taking a Torah scroll and throwing it on the ground. How could you possibly do that? The sin, so to speak, of the golden calf was mirrored by Moshe on some level. Now again, of course, we understand that Moshe did something appropriate and there was a rationale for it and so on. But there's a certain symmetry between the unconscionable behavior of the nation and what Moshe is doing. And he goes through sin by sin the people did and how Moshe is also acting in a way that resembles the people. Why? Moshe is the nation. The nation is Moshe. Before this, the song at the sea, right after the splitting of the sea, there's a change. The nation believes in God, and they believe in Moshe, his servant. So what Rabbi Tzadok suggests is that this means they believed in the part of themselves that was mosaic, that was like Moshe. There's a part of Moshe, there's a part of this incredible power that Moshe represents within every one of these 600,000 souls. And there was a recognition, a belief in God and in themselves and in their ability to effectuate tremendous world-changing change. And he spells this out. What does it mean to believe in the Moshe that's within you? A lot of people think, I'm like an advanced animal. I'm a really, really developed and evolved Homo sapien. Some people think, this is his words, that they're like an animal. An animal, it's strong and mighty and powerful and evocative and cute and talented and strong, and then it dies and it's forgotten. And it's lost. We believe that God cares about us and we're not meaningless. We matter. We also say the whole world is created for me. And we understand that our soul originates in the loftiest of places in existence. And God delights, so to speak, over us. And when we do his will, we're changing the entire world in a way similar to Moshe. This is a very empowering belief that the nation developed. Again, this is a homiletic interpretation, but it comes from a very reputable source. And the concept is certainly one that is well accepted. We each have a mission that's, like Moshe, supposed to change the world. Now, it's 1/600th of Moshe's mission. But there is a mosaic part of each one of us. There's a slice of Moshe within each one of us. And most of us don't believe it. And the change that happened to the nation was that they believed in it. They believed that God endowed them with tremendous ability to affect the world in a way that resembles the way that Moshe affected the world. Now, there's a corollary to this. There's a parallel to this. We spoke about Messiah just earlier. The Talmud talks about Messiah and says, well, what's Messiah's name? And the Talmud says, well, they had this debate in the various different academies. What is the name of Messiah? So in the academy of Rabbi Shiloh, they determined that his name is Shiloh. And in the academy of Rabbi Yanai, they said his name was Yinon, which is a version of Yanai. And in the academy of Rabbi Hanania, or Hanina, they said his name was Hanania, or Hanina. And I was trying to figure out, wait, every academy just happens to come up with the conclusion that the name of Messiah is the name of their leader? This is a very unusual thing. Is this just some irrational confidence that your teacher is the Messiah? So what the commentaries tell us is that Messiah is mosaic, just like Moshe. The soul of Messiah is one of those expansive souls that incorporates within it all 600,000 forces of our nation. And that's just as the whole people, all 600,000 had to be coalesced around the mountain in order for Moshe to ascend the mountain. If one part of the 600,000 units of this great nation was not ready to receive the Torah, Moshe could not have ascended that mountain. That's true with regards to Messiah. There's a point of Moshe within every one of us. There's a point of Messiah, a point of holiness and purity and greatness that we need to unearth and naturalize within us. And when we do our job collectively, that's when Messiah is revealed. We have to believe in ourselves. This doesn't mean to become egotistical and to have self-confidence to the exclusion of confidence in God. This does not mean to be self-centered. It means to recognize that we were endowed with a mission, that the whole world depends on it. And if we don't do our mission, Moshe can't do his. If we don't do our mission, Messiah cannot do his. There's a slice of greatness within you. A mosaic, a messianic slice of greatness. Believe in it. God believes in you. You believe in God. And you believe in Moshe, servant, the part of Moshe that's within your heart. Powerful idea, Hasidic idea. But now it's time for the dilemma portion of the podcast. And here's the dilemma. Maybe it sounds a bit heretical. Do we actually want greatness? We all want to be great. We all want to accomplish great things. We want to leave our mark on the world, make an imprint, an indelible imprint and impact upon the world. Are we aware that there's a cost to that? Are we ready to pay the price? In our Parsha, we learn how every unit of greatness, every module of greatness comes with a challenge. It's merged with some degree of difficulty. You want greatness? What are you willing to forfeit to achieve it? There are trade-offs. We want our cake, and we want to eat it, and we want to not gain any weight, right? That's what we want. We discover in our Parsha that the greatness comes right away together with some challenge, difficulty, test. We're going to have to forego something. I think the best example of this is the greatest blessing of them all and the greatest mission of them all. That's to exercise your greatest superpower. Man is created in the image of God. What does that mean? Well, God is a creator. Man, humanity, can be a creator as well. And God's creation was all about a human. And we too have some capacity to create humans. We could be parents. That's greatness. You think about it. It's like a link in a chain that's been going on since Adam. I did the calculation in my book because it comes from my grandmother. If you have a fairly large family, let's say 7 children, which I have the privilege of coming from a larger family, and my wife also comes from a larger family. So by our standards, it's not that big of a family. 7 children. But each one of your 7 children, they have 7 children of their own. And each one of your 49 grandchildren, well, they have 7 children of their own. And so on. How long does it take to have 1 million descendants? And it's a lot faster than we imagine. 220 years or so. 7 and change generations. We have the ability to do that. Are we willing to pay the price? There's a pattern in our Parsha. You get greatness, it comes at a cost. In our Parsha, there's this incredible heights that the nation achieves, and it's always paired with tests and with challenges. Manna from heaven. Is there any greater recognition of the angelic properties of humanity? Manna is food of angels, bread of angels. Lechem abirim. And how is it introduced in the Torah chapter 16 verse 4? Why? Why is God giving us the manna. We think it's for food. No. The verse says it's so that they can be tested. You get food for one day. Tomorrow, there's no plan. You try to save it for tomorrow, you can't. You are in the desert and there's nothing. It's barren. The plan is reliance on God. It's greatness that comes at a cost. You have to forfeit your security, your so-called security, and realize that you've only got to rely upon. Your cupboards are empty. Your credit cards are maxed out. There's no food in 100 miles in any direction, and your kids will be hungry tomorrow. And the greatness is to rely on God. But you're forfeiting a whole different system of living. We want security. We want certainty. We want stability. And the manna says, well, that's exactly what you have to give up in order to achieve that close relationship with the Almighty. Splitting of the sea, a miracle, the lights of which we've never seen before. A nation of millions walking amidst walls of water. And the Egyptians, they enter the same exact path, and the waters just wash over them. And that's a miracle that just propels the nation to erupt in uproarious, spontaneous song. And the very next verse, 3 days without water. On day 2, your mind is already thinking about other things besides for that miracle, right? You achieved this, you witnessed things that even the prophet Ezekiel did not witness. That comes at a cost. Oh, Moshe hits the rock and it emits water. And right away, you have the encounter with the fiercest antagonist of them all, Amalek. The greater you are, the greater you aspire to be, the more you will be asked to live on a knife's edge. And this is, I think it's important to know this. Greatness, it comes at a cost, but really that is what forges the greatness. There's consequences. We want the greatness. Are we willing to pay the price? That's a dilemma. But we have to believe that we have the ability to do it. Believe in God and believe in Moshe, his servant, that little slice of absolute transcendent and transformative greatness that we have within ourselves. We have the ability to do it. And we're going in with our eyes open. The Torah tells us these stories to know that this is what it means. You're upgrading. You're living more and more and more like an angel. You're not bringing those petty beliefs and those petty securities. You don't take your little security blanket with you. You're throwing that away. And you're going to be enveloped by God. Clouds by day, a pillar of fire at night. You have been upgraded. I appreciate your time and your attention. Thank you for listening to this edition of the Parsha Podcast. We're doing it live now on torchzoom.com, Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Central. Of course, if you're listening to this in the podcast, it's already Thursday-ish. I'd like to release it early Thursday morning or late Wednesday night. But now it's Tuesday night in Houston, Texas. I'm in the Torch Center in Houston, Texas, in the vaunted studios here in Houston. Tuesday night, I'm going to finish the podcast, edit it, make sure it sounds great. Scheduled to release tomorrow night. Thanks for listening. Have a fantastic and splendid rest of your day. A wondrous, uplifting, meaningful, successful rest of your week. And of course, the Holy Shabbos, which is upcoming. It should be wonderful for every one of us. We should only hear good news from all of our family and all of our friends and our whole community and the whole nation and the whole world. Shabbos should shower all of us with tremendous blessing. And please, God, with the help of the Almighty, we'll talk again next week on the Parsha Podcast, torchzoom.com live. Just put in those words, torchzoom.com into your browser. It'll just pop up. It's like magic. 8 p.m. Central, which is, I guess, is 9 p.m. Eastern. And then there's Mountain Time, and then there's Pacific Time. And there's time all over the world. You got to do the math. When it's 8 o'clock in the Torch Center, that's when we start. Until then, we'll hopefully only hear good news. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.